Here we are, the richest nation in the world, living in a time of extraordinary innovation and expertise and creative thinking. And we've got a whole planet of people interested in working together to solve problems. This is great news because we've got serious problems to solve. And the problems are us. We have a culture of abusers linked up with a culture of enablers, and they've been dragging us around the same track for 400 years. We've got to work very hard to break that cycle. And some of us are wondering how. But we don't need to wonder. And we need to get into why, because that's something missing from our national conversation, and it's critical. But first, let's get clear on something. Politics and self-care are the same thing. And that means we know exactly what to do. We have to enforce strong boundaries with abusers, and we have to call out the enablers who aren't. We've got to take action steps for progress and take care of ourselves in the process. Now, this is no small task, and we've got to talk about the abusers because it's important, and we have to repeat it for each other. It's hard to confront abuse because it's hard to believe it's happening. How could anybody act that way? Or I must have done something to deserve this. As empathetic people, we're going to naturally seek and hope for some understanding from our abusers. Let's take one example, Rush Limbaugh. His last interview on Fox News, which of course they're replaying. And Rush is repeating the same stuff we're just so exhausted having to listen to. Black Lives Matter, largest civil rights movement in the history of the country, is destroying America. The left hates the country, always has, and you know the rest. Gaslighting, when a person or a group deliberately projects their behavior onto you to distort reality and avoid responsibility. And the purpose of gaslighting is to enable continued abuse. It doesn't stop by negotiating with it or meeting in the middle. It stops with boundaries. And it has to be stopped. Because the inevitable endgame of an ideology that opposes reality is self-destruction, like we see in Texas, like we see with COVID, like we saw in the Capitol insurrection, and like we see in the 24/7 campaign against having a government or any national cooperation at all. What's the end result of that look like? Like unchecked drug or alcohol addiction, the inevitable consequence of rejecting reality is suicide. Rejecting reality requires a massive amount of self-deception. You have to have a false identity, a make-believe origin story. You have to think you're being persecuted and foster fantasies of revenge. This should not be enabled by anybody to any degree. We are not caught in the middle between a far left and a far right. On one end of the continuum, we have reality, and on the other, we have delusion. Thinking scientists and doctors can't be trusted, or that a government, if they provide electricity or healthcare, that's tyrannical and life-threatening. This is a dangerous state of mind for everybody within a 25,000-mile radius, which is the circumference of the whole Earth. It's hard to reckon with, but we can't expect anybody continuing to embrace that culture to restrain their behavior. They can't be shamed. Look at how they continue to make their worst members their champions. Where they stop is up to us to decide. That's what boundaries are for. It's not an argument. It's not a negotiation. It's tough love. It's how we deal with addicts and children or criminals, by enforcing consequences for bad behavior. And this battle between delusion and reality, it's a battle between materialism and human values. That's the real culture war, as old as humankind. Materialism means working for greed alone. And it's got a lot of slogans, every man for himself, winner take all, survival of the fittest. It's not even an ideology. It's just a list of excuses for selfishness and cruelty. And it's delusional because ultimately it's self-destructive. Greed can provide us fuel, but it can't be a destination. On the opposite side of materialism we've got human values. A cooperative society whose purpose is taking care of each other. That's practical and realistic and the right thing to do. On a basic level, that's how we make sure everybody's got electricity and heat and air conditioning and running water and breathable air. That's how we bring this pandemic to an end. Now, this should be common sense. A society that's clear that its purpose is itself is peaceful and harmonious, and it not only maintains people's individuality, but it encourages it. Those are the two extremes. To move the needle in the right direction, we have to not only set boundaries, but take action. And there's things we can do right now in this moment to get immediate aid to somebody in a state of emergency, to our family in Texas. Moving forward, every state in our union needs a coordinated energy grid. That means we need representatives in government who believe in having a government, one that represents all the tribes of the nation. And there are multiple organizations actively working to make sure democracy lasts another year. So let's make sure we're joining them. While we're doing this, don't forget that we live in a rage economy. A rage economy. People like Rush Limbaugh made his fortune and widened that path for the O'Reillys and Trumps and Carlsons and Parlors and all the rest. These are businesses, above all. On the far end of that spectrum, delusional materialism. And they make their fortunes off of that white persecution propaganda and revenge fantasies. And the social media platforms that they're now on are designed to get us reacting and clicking and scrolling and stealing our time. So let us be precise and purposeful in how we respond to this environment. The other end of the spectrum is not the left or Democrats or CNN or anybody along the spectrum of looking to profit one person or one tribe of people over another. The other end of the spectrum is not working for profits at all, but where profits work for us, for human beings. That's what's required for an advanced society. That's what our massive wealth and technology and creativity and passion and compassion, that's what it's for. That's what it's all for. And this is the most important part of this whole thing. We can't underestimate our individual power in changing the culture around us. There's this phenomenon in science, and it's called emergence. And it's where we see something having properties that its individual parts don't have on their own, but at the same time is entirely dependent on the intention of those individual parts. It's a miracle to observe it. We see it with schools of fish, when they're swimming in perfect unison, or birds flying in perfect formation. The fish and the birds are just trying to stick close to each other. And that's the result. And we see it everywhere in nature. How much more so for human beings? The result of the intention to work together creates an effect greater, far greater than what we can imagine individually. If we embrace human values in our own life, if we pursue purpose over profits, if we respect our own healthy boundaries and those of others, and support each other in doing so, we are living the ripple effect. We're adding one drop of holy water to a culture in dire need of healing. And if everyone adds one drop, we have a river, and then a wave. Never underestimate the role that we each have to play. Let's do our part and witness the results. That will be the proof.